Hello, everyone. Welcome to Women Conquering Cravings. I'm your host, Deanna Mayo, and today I'm so excited to be joined by Laura Heath. Laura is a registered pharmacist, a certified health coach, and a certified wellness life coach with a specialty in the psychology of emotional eating. And she coaches women who identify as emotional eaters to help them heal their emotional relationship with food and teaches them how to decrease the chatter around food and focus on their own self-worth. Please help me welcome Laura Heath. Hi, Laura. Thanks for being with me today.
Hi, Deanna. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
I'm so glad you're here. So I would love to start by finding out a little bit about how it is that you got into this field. Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I have a degree in pharmacy. So I've been a hospital pharmacist for 23 years. So about 3 or 4 years ago, I was in an environment where I was working with cancer patients and the volume of work was increasing and, I wasn't getting breaks, wasn't getting lunches, and found that environment stressful. My own response to that was I can't make a mistake, obviously, in this environment. So I have to be hyper diligent and be very careful. And the stress at the end of the day and even through the day kind of was building. And I found myself turning to food to just solve that a little bit. I can't fix this environment that I'm in, but I can take the edge off. And of course, we all know that food in the moment kind of works, right? So our patients would bring us in some snacks or homemade goodies. And, I'd find myself making that little side trek to the room where all the goodies were, get in the car after work, drive to the grocery store and have my 4 or 5 things on repeat that would be my solution for that drive home, to kind of be my reward, to feel a bit better, to be able to be ready to start the rest of my evening with my kids and my family.
Yeah.
And as I made a decision to ultimately change that work environment, become certified in health coaching and life coaching, I came to the realization this is emotional eating. This is me not really taking care of my emotions and solving them in a way that doesn't solve them at all. And so as I figured out how to stop that behavior, how to take care of me, how to feel better without using food, I recognized with time that this is what I should be teaching other people. This is where my coaching should go in terms of specialization. And so that's kind of the journey from this hospital pharmacy role where you can't make a mistake and the volume of work goes up. And I didn't know how to cope with that other than to have a little food to solve it, to where I am today.
Yeah. Wow. It's so interesting because I think you bring a unique perspective being a pharmacist, right? And having not only worked with folks on their health, but also out in the hospital system, but also, of course, now working with folks on their health outside of the hospital system, and then your own journey as well. So I'm so excited to dig in and learn more about, your unique perspective on conquering cravings. I know that, in working with women on emotional eating, cravings is a big piece of it. And I'm curious to know, what are some of the common challenges that you see people having that either lead them to working with you or lead them to say, this isn't working, or maybe even your own, more about your own challenges that led you to go, it's time for me to get some help?
Yeah, I think there's a few different things that come up for people. I mean, for many, I think they become unhappy with their physical appearance, right? They gain weight, they don't feel like they're in a right-sized body, and that contributes to this self-loathing, this self-hatred, this real beating up of self. So the inner critic is going constantly, and they're wanting to change that behavior, but it's so painful in that space that they continue to use food to feel a little bit better in that space. And then that continues to amplify the problem of, I don't like myself, and now I weigh even more than I did before. And I know for me, that was the cycle where I found myself in, where I'm like, oh, the scale's going up. Oh my gosh, I feel terrible about myself. I'm a terrible human. I got to get this weight off. The same chatter in my head probably happens in many other women's heads who are in this space, where we think we're going to like kind of muscle our way through and tell ourselves to smarten up and be better. And I think that's a super painful place to be in, but that's the place where sometimes people ultimately come and say, I want to figure this out. I can't stand the way I'm treating myself. If they recognize that,
Right.
I can't stand the chatter in my head because it won't turn off. And probably the biggest thing is I can't stand me, what I look like and my physical appearance and how I'm using food to solve a problem that's not solving it for me.
Right. It's not really a food problem, is it?
Not at all. No.
Yeah.
And, when you hear my story, I mean, that was about a work environment and my perception of the stress and my perception of the safety. And, now in hindsight, I can look back and say, well, I had colleagues doing the same job who didn't respond in the same way. So the circumstance of that environment that was busy and had a high risk with the patients I was taking care of, I responded to it differently than colleague A, B, and C, which when I stood back and actually realized, oh, I could do this differently. I could think differently about my environment. Oh my gosh, I could feel differently in this environment. That was powerful, because I went on to continue to work in pharmacy, in hospital pharmacy, and doing that kind of work where, you can't really make a mistake. The stakes are high. The stress could be persistent if you didn't manage your mind. And so that ability to take a step back and go, what can you control here? What is it that you're thinking? How are you feeling? And how is that contributing to this action that you've taken in the past to overeat or to eat food that doesn't serve you or to emotionally eat? How could you do this differently this time?
Yeah. What really strikes me about this is the idea that, so many of us, and I say us because I'm in recovery from eating too much sugar by far. This idea that we can muscle through, right? And that somehow it's a lack of willpower or knowledge. But I mean, you're a healthcare provider. So
Mhm.
if you don't have the knowledge, right? How on
Yeah.
earth could a lay person have it, right? And it's really not about that, is it? It's not about knowing something.
Yeah, I mean, sure, in our coaching certification, we learn all sorts of things about food, but in general, most of us know what we should eat. It's that we're shoulding all over ourselves. We
Yeah.
know that piece. What we don't know is how to enact it
Yeah.
when we're in a place of suffering.
Yeah. How to overcome that craving in the moment and
Hmm.
instead eat something that is more healthful, right? Instead of damaging.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when folks come to you, they're where they have an issue, they know that they haven't been able to solve it on their own. What's the first step? And for those who are listening today, what's a step that they could take to start moving forward in a more healthy direction?
I think one thing that works for a lot of people, though not everybody, and that is very much an individualized thing, is to take a little break from sugar, to have a bit of a detox period. And, depending on the severity of the addiction in your mind, that may not be the first step for everybody. But for a lot of people who come into my programs or come in and want to work with me one-on-one, that's a discussion that we have in terms of, are you ready to consider this? Would this be something you would be willing to try? Does it feel like a doable thing for you to take sugar out? Not completely and not forever, but for right now, would you take 30 days and have a reset in terms of taking all this sugar out so that we can reset your hormones, so that we can reset your insulin, which if it's always high, you're always hungry.
Right.
We can set your ghrelin, and your leptin, which tell you whether you're hungry or you're full. And we can decrease your cravings by having that dopamine hit stop. Because
Right.
the reason we keep craving is because we keep getting the hit, and then we have the crash, and then we need the hit again, and then we have the crash. So as long as they're going into it willing to have a period of time of 2 or 3 or 4 days where I'm going to have a bit of withdrawal here, almost like, a drug addict, almost like someone coming off of cigarettes, someone coming off of
Right.
alcohol. It's a very similar thing. So if you're willing to kind of persevere through a few tougher days, then on the other side of that is the promise of some quieting of the brain, a decrease in the cravings and the chatter and the desire. And then we can go to step 2, which, as you said, is not about the food. It's not about the sugar. It's not about the food. It's about, why am I going to that food in the
Right.
first place?
Yeah.
For some people, that has to flip around.
Mhm.
For some people, the intensity, the need for that dopamine hit is so high that they really can't get through a day or 2 or 3 without sugar. And there needs to be some tools in place first
Right.
to help them sit with the discomfort of that craving and kind of learn how to do that, so that it's a bit of a slower taper off of sugar, as opposed to let's stop this. Let's
Yeah.
get the hormones right. Let's get the cravings down, and then let's manage the mind. It can go the other way as well.
Sure. And for someone who says, okay, I'm ready to go through this withdrawal period, and maybe
Mhm.
they haven't experienced that before, having, maybe not having quit cigarettes or alcohol or whatever it might be, what should they be aware of, like, so that they don't give up in the middle of it? Because it's not necessarily going to be easy, right?
Sure. Yeah. I think knowing what to expect in terms of that withdrawal is helpful, because then they are able to know, well, this is normal. It's normal for me to feel irritable right now. It's normal for me to maybe have a short temper right now. It's normal for me to have a headache right now. It's normal for me to be so very tired right now. And if I know that these are the things that I'm going to have happen over the next few days, why don't I plan that timeline appropriately so that I can take the time I need to take care of me during that time? Maybe that's extra sleep. Maybe that's a little bit more water. Maybe that's not time at work. Maybe it's a weekend. Maybe it's a time when my partner or my husband or my mom takes care of the kids so that I can just
Mm.
take care of me and get through a period that's kind of tough, because 3 or 4 or 5 days later, I'll be in a much better place to bring some of those pieces back and manage all the pieces of my life, not just this, ooh, this feels really hard, I think I'll just quit again.
Right. Now, one of the things I heard you mention, which we didn't necessarily talk about, that we were going to talk about this, but you mentioned the idea of, coming off sugar for a while, and it may not necessarily be forever.
Mhm.
So, I'm curious to know what that might look like for folks, knowing that, sometimes people use this word addiction. And if we look at other kinds of addictions, people talk about being in recovery or sober, and they don't have that thing anymore. But it
Mhm.
sounds like, for some of the folks that you work with, they're able to integrate sugar back into their life in a healthy way. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I recognize that for some people, they may ultimately make the decision to never eat sugar again, right? To have a bright line around, I don't eat this thing. I choose not to eat this thing. I know that it doesn't serve me and I'm happy to not eat it. That's one option. It's not the option I take personally, and it's not the option that I find most of my clients choose to take, nor the option that I really recommend that they take. Because I think when we tell ourselves we have an addiction and we believe that I'm addicted to that food, it puts a label on us.
Mhm.
It puts a belief around our inability to trust ourselves that maybe is actually harmful. We are not addicted to sugar in the same way that we are addicted to heroin, even though our brains light up in the same way. I get that. The pleasure centers of the brain light up. So it's easy for us to tell people that story of, see, It's just like when you use heroin or cocaine, it's lighting up the same areas of the brain. Sure, it is. It's a dopamine response, but that doesn't mean you have an addiction. And so if you own that title of I'm addicted, I can't trust myself, therefore I can never ever have it again, you are in a place where you're going to be practicing restriction from time to time, where you are going to be using willpower, where you're going to be holding the beach ball underwater instead of letting it float by. So my approach is, when I love myself, which we haven't gotten into, but when I love myself enough to take care of me, most of the time, I'm not really going to eat sugar. However, I can choose to eat whatever I want. It's just that when I make a decision to eat sugar, I'm going to use my higher brain to do it. I'm going to use my adult brain, not going to use my primitive toddler brain in the moment. So there's going to be some parameters around it. One is adult brain, not toddler brain. And the other piece that goes with that is I'm going to decide that ahead of time using the adult brain, not the toddler brain in the moment when I feel sad or mad or angry or overwhelmed or whatever the emotion is, right? So when I plan to eat sugar and I use my adult brain to make that decision, and I do it for the purposes of joy, not the purposes of suppressing, buffering, blocking, managing an emotion, experience is completely different. And you know that just as well as I do. If I sat down and ate 6 cookies because I couldn't stand my boss, that's a very different experience than having a date with, for me, my husband, where we decide to share a piece of carrot cake. You know, that can be a joyful experience. So I kind of call that a joy eat, the idea that it's not my typical. I don't normally have this food, but I can have it at any time. It's just that I choose not to most of the time, but then I'm not believing the addiction story. And I'm also able to enjoy these things once in a while. And as long as we're not in that diet restrict mindset where you believe I can't have it, there's a lot of joy that comes from knowing I can. I just most of the time choose not to.
Right. I think the distinction here is I'm choosing ahead of time, not in the moment in response to a trigger. And then the second distinction being I'm choosing it to have a joyful memory or experience, not to numb, deal with, push down something that's negative. Right.
That's right. That's right.
And it's also, I think the third distinction is I'm not a part of a cycle of eating this particular thing, you know, where, as you described earlier, right, the dopamine hit, now I'm coming down, I need more so I can get the hit again. That's very different from, you know, a special occasion, enjoying dinner with your husband.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, this has been very helpful and useful, I know. And I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to continue learning from you, your experience and your wisdom, with the free gift that you have set up for everyone who's here with us today. And it's your Crush Your Cravings ebook. And my understanding is that in the book, we can learn exactly what cravings are, why they happen, and what you can do to put them in their place, right? And that it's not necessarily about depriving yourself, as we just discussed, from these foods, but instead enjoying them in moderation and in a way that lets you reach your goals and feel good in the process, right?
That's right. Yes.
Good. So I want to encourage everyone to, you know, click the button, get your copy of the Crush Your Cravings ebook, read it, you know, pick a small piece to start moving forward with. We know this isn't going to change overnight, but we can get you moving into the right direction so you can start feeling better, thinking better, right? And feeling emotionally better too.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap up for today?
You know, the only thing that I would add is something that we touched on but didn't go into a lot of detail. And it's kind of around that idea of the inner critic and how terribly mean she can be as you've potentially gone through this journey of trying to figure this out in the past.
Right.
And failing and being mean to yourself, failing in quotation marks and being mean to yourself. And I think it's really, really important as you make a decision to crush your cravings, to kind of come to a place where you don't use food to solve your emotions, that you first address that inner critic and kind of quash her down
Yeah.
almost with a lot of self-love, with a lot of self-compassion, with a lot of curiosity, and with some patience, because we aren't going to do this journey perfectly in a linear fashion where we never ever slip up, mess up, whatever the words are that you use to describe all the things that you do wrong right now. We're going to fail. So we might as well fail forward, but do it in a kind way, in a loving way, in a curious way, and notice how mean she is and find a way to address her, to talk back to her, to say, this isn't how we're going to do this anymore. We're actually going to move forward and achieve what we want to achieve with self-compassion and love, not self-loathing and hatred.
Yeah, one of my prior teachers in a completely different realm of life used to call that voice the ideal woman, because she does everything perfectly and she wants to see that you do it that way too, right?
Mhm.
And she's not very nice,
Not at all.
and she's not real either, because there is no perfect, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I was chatting with someone who identified as an addict with a different substance not too long ago, and he said something that I haven't forgotten since, and that was, relapse is a part of recovery. It does not mean it's the end. It's an
Yeah.
opportunity to learn and continue growing forward.
Yeah.
So
For,
I
for,
love
for
that.
sure. For sure. Because I think all of us are going to have that relapse, that slip up. That moment is golden. When you're working with somebody who knows what they're doing and can help you, when you have some coaching tools under your belt so you can coach yourself,
Yeah.
those are the opportunities to figure out, oh, this is the thing that happens to me every time I have 3 extra drinks. Oh, I have these insights that I didn't have before on why this is even happening. This is so enlightening. This is so useful. And if you aren't willing to be curious and kind to yourself, you'll never, ever see it as enlightening and useful. You'll see it as, I've messed up and now I've got to find a new diet for Monday because this one doesn't work anymore.
I don't know that it could have been said any better. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I want to remind everyone, make sure you get your copy of Laura's Crush Your Cravings ebook. Laura Heath, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Deanna. It was a pleasure.